Sir, should I take the cake back to the kitchen?
Leave it. Someone might still come.
Holt Bramwell turned 58 that morning, alone in a house that used to be full of noise. Bramwell Ridge had 14 bedrooms, a staff of 9, and a driveway long enough that guests used to complain about the walk from their cars to the front steps. Today, the driveway was empty. The gates hadn't opened once. Even the birds outside the dining room window seemed to know better than to make too much noise. 3 years ago, Holt built Vantry Freight Holdings into one of the largest logistics networks on the eastern seaboard. He worked the docks himself before he ever wore a suit. He knew every driver's name, every warehouse foreman, every late shipment before his own assistant did. He used to tell young hires that the smell of diesel and rain on a loading dock at 5 in the morning was the smell of a company actually working. People used to say Holt Bramwell didn't run his company from behind a desk. He ran it from the ground up, one handshake, one shift, one small kindness at a time. Then came the accident. A delivery truck lost its brakes on a wet overpass just outside the Vantry Central Depot. Holt was in the passenger seat, doing what he always did, riding along at 5 in the morning to check a new route himself before it went live. The driver, a younger man named Corbin, who'd been with the company less than a year, walked away with nothing worse than a broken wrist and a concussion. Holt wasn't as lucky. He woke up 4 days later in a hospital bed with tubes in both arms, and a doctor standing at the foot of the bed with the kind of careful, rehearsed voice doctors use when they have to say something they've said too many times before. "You will not walk again, Mr. Bramwell. I'm sorry." Holt remembered staring at the ceiling tiles for a long time after the doctor left, doing the strange arithmetic that people do in moments like that, counting up everything he thought he still had, and everything he now understood he didn't. He remembered his wife, gone 6 years by then to a heart condition nobody caught in time, and thinking, almost absurdly, that at least she wasn't there to watch this particular version of him arrive. Ride came. 3 days later, in a suet, already, halfway, threw a sentence about board optics before he'd even asked how his father was feeling. "Dad, listen, the press release is already drafted. We just need to agree on language before anyone outside the family sees it." "Hello to you too, son," Holt had said, and Reed had at least had the decency to look briefly ashamed before pulling out his phone anyway. In the weeks right after he came home from the hospital, the house had still been full of people. Physical therapists, a revolving door of specialists, board members who came bearing gift baskets, and careful, rehearsed sympathy, the kind reserved for men whose usefulness was still being calculated. Holt remembered those early visits clearly, the way conversations would drift, almost involuntarily, towards succession planning and interim leadership structures, even as he sat right there in the room, very much alive, very much still capable of running his own company from a wheelchair if anyone had simply let him try. That was the last time most of the board visited him in person. At first, it was flowers, big, expensive arrangements sent to the hospital with cards signed by assistants, not by the board members themselves. Then it was calls that got shorter, 5 minutes instead of 30, always ending with someone else on the other end saying they had another meeting to get to. Then it was emails instead of calls. Then eventually it was nothing at all, unless a signature was required. Somewhere in the space of 3 years, Holt Bramwell went from a man everyone needed to see to a man everyone found a reason not to. Odessa Cray had worked at Bramwell Ridge for 11 years, long before the accident, long before any of this. She was the only one left in that enormous house who still remembered his birthday without a calendar app reminding her. She'd baked the small cake herself that morning because none of the usual catering staff had been called this year. There was no reason to call them. There was no one coming. "Anything from Reed?" Holt asked, not looking up from the cake. Odessa hesitated just a moment too long before answering. "Not yet, sir." "You can say it, Odessa. You don't have to soften it for me." "There's nothing to soften, sir. There's just nothing." Reed Bramwell was Holt's only son, 31 years old, and a rising name on the Vantry board. Young, sharp, well-liked by the kind of people who liked confidence more than character. He hadn't set foot in Bramwell Ridge in 4 months. His last text to his father had been about a signature needed on a shareholder document, sent at 11 at night with no greeting and no follow-up. Nothing since. Holt's phone buzzed once on the table. He looked down at it, and for half a second, in a way he would never have admitted to Odessa or to anyone else, he let himself hope. It was a calendar invite. Budget review, Q3 projections, sent by Palmer Doss, Vantry's chief financial officer. Not a birthday message. A meeting request, sent on a Saturday, on his birthday, as if the date meant nothing at all to the person who sent it. Holt set the phone face down on the table, harder than he meant to. "Sir," Odessa said carefully, folding a dish towel in her hands just to have something to do with them, "would you like me to call anyone? Let them know it's—" "They know what day it is, Odessa." His voice wasn't angry. It was tired, the particular kind of tired that comes from holding something heavy for far too long without ever being allowed to put it down. "They know. They just don't see a reason to come." "That's not right, sir. Whatever's going on, that isn't right." "Maybe not," Holt said quietly, "but it's what's happening, and I'm too tired today to pretend otherwise." What Holt didn't know yet, what he wouldn't understand for another 2 weeks, was that this wasn't simple neglect. It wasn't grief that had quietly worn thin, or the kind of natural distance that happens when a man stops being able to walk into a room and command it the way he once did. It was something being managed, deliberately, by people who had learned slowly and carefully that Holt Bramwell, alone and forgotten in his own house, was far easier to work around than Holt Bramwell at the head of a boardroom table. He didn't know that yet. All he knew, sitting in front of an uneaten slice of cake in a room built for 14 people and occupied by exactly one, was that 58 years old had never felt so much like being invisible. If you've ever felt forgotten by the people who once needed you most, stay with this one all the way through, because in about 20 minutes, someone was going to walk through that gate who had absolutely nothing to gain by doing it, and everything that happened after would trace back to that single, small decision. 2 miles from Bramwell Ridge, in a modest one-bedroom apartment above a hardware store, 7-year-old Nell Ferro sat at the kitchen table with a piece of red construction paper and a box of crayons that had seen better days, half of them broken, a few worn down to nubs from overuse. "Dad, how do you spell paralyzed?" August Ferro looked up from the sink, hands still wet from washing the breakfast dishes. "Why do you need that word, Nellie?" "Because I'm making Mr. Holt a birthday card, and I want to write that he's brave. Like, brave because he's in a wheelchair and he still smiles at me every time you take him to the doctor place." August dried his hands slowly, taking longer than the task required. He hadn't expected that sentence to land the way it did. August Ferro was 34 years old, a single father for the last 2 years, since his wife Marianne died of an illness that took 8 months to explain and 1 long afternoon to actually end. He worked 2 jobs to keep Nell in her school and their small apartment above the hardware store, weekdays as a warehouse dispatcher, and 2 afternoons a week as a contracted driver for a home health agency, taking an elderly client named Holt Bramwell to and from physical therapy. August didn't know who Holt Bramwell used to be. He didn't know about Vantry Freight Holdings or Bramwell Ridge, or the 14 bedrooms sitting mostly empty behind those iron gates. He just knew a quiet, dignified man in a wheelchair who always asked about Nell by name, who tipped him more than he should for gas money he never once asked for, and told him once unprompted and almost offhandedly that raising a daughter alone took a kind of strength most people never had to find out they had. "Today's not one of my days," August said, half to himself, checking the worn calendar magnet stuck to the fridge. "I'm not even scheduled to drive him until Thursday." "But it's his birthday," Nell said, like that settled the matter. Entirely. Because for a 7-year-old it did. "Nellie, it's not that simple. I've got a shift tonight and—" "Dad, it's his birthday, and nobody's there, I can feel it." August didn't ask how a 7-year-old could feel something like that from 2 miles away. He'd learned a long time ago not to argue with the particular certainty children carry about things that matter. He looked over her shoulder at the card. She'd drawn a wheelchair with wheels made of yellow crayon sun rays, and underneath it, in careful, uneven letters that leaned slightly to the right, "Happy birthday, Mr. Holt. You are brave." He could have mailed it. He could have waited until Thursday and handed it over between physical therapy exercises like it was nothing. Instead, August picked up his keys off the counter. "Get your shoes, kiddo. We're taking a drive." Nell was already halfway to the door before he finished the sentence. The gate at Bramwell Ridge buzzed at 2:40 in the afternoon. Odessa checked the security monitor mounted near the kitchen, half expecting a delivery, half allowing herself for just one more second to hope it might be a member of the board finally showing up. It was a beat-up sedan she recognized immediately. August Ferro's car. "Sir?" Odessa said, stepping quickly into the dining room. "Mr. Ferro is at the gate. He's not scheduled today." Holt straightened slightly in his wheelchair, something flickering behind his tired eyes. "Let him in." A few minutes later, August walked into the dining room with Nell's small hand in his, looking almost apologetic for intruding on a house this size. "Sorry to just show up, Mr. Bramwell. I know it's not my day. Nell she wanted to give you something, and I didn't have the heart to tell her no." Nell didn't wait for permission. She walked straight up to Holt's wheelchair and held out the red construction paper card with both hands, careful and solemn, the way you'd hand someone something fragile. "Happy birthday," she said. "I made it myself. Dad only helped with the spelling." Holt Bramwell, who had sat through 3 years of empty calendars and forgotten calls, took the card from a 7-year-old girl he had met maybe 4 times in his life, and found, to his own quiet surprise, that his hands weren't entirely steady. He read it slowly. Then he read it again. "You think I'm brave?" he asked her, his voice softer than August had ever heard it. "You smile even when your legs don't work right," Nell said, matter of fact, the way only a child can be about something an adult would spend years dancing around. "That's brave. My dad says being sad and still showing up anyway is the bravest thing there is." "Your dad sounds like a smart man." "He is," Nell said. "Except he can't cook. We eat a lot of cereal." Holt laughed, a short, surprised bark of a laugh, like something breaking loose after being stuck too long. "Sit down," Holt said. "Both of you. There's cake. Nobody's touched it." It wasn't a request either of them felt like refusing. Odessa brought out 3 plates instead of 1, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she found herself smiling as she cut the cake. Nell asked Holt a dozen questions in the first 5 minutes alone, whether he'd ever driven a race car, whether the wheelchair could go fast if he really tried, whether he had a favourite colour, which turned out to be the same shade of green as the lawn outside. Holt answered every single one of them seriously, the way he might once have answered a difficult question from a shareholder, and found that he meant every answer. "You're good with kids," August said at one point, watching his daughter chatter away without a trace of the shyness she usually showed around strangers. "I used to be good with people, generally," Holt said, something wry in his voice. "It's been a while since anyone gave me the chance to practice." They stayed for over an hour. August hadn't planned on it. He had a second shift starting later that evening, but something about the room made it hard to leave. Nell talked about her school, about a science fair project, on volcanoes made from baking soda and red food colouring, about how badly she wanted a dog, but her dad kept saying their apartment was too small for one. Holt found himself laughing, actually laughing, for the first time in longer than he wanted to admit out loud. At one point, while Nell sat a few feet away, distracted, drawing a second card, just for fun, August spoke quietly, choosing his words with obvious care. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Bramwell? It's not my business, I know. But where is everybody? A house like this, and it's just you and Miss Cray." Holt was quiet for a moment, turning his fork over once on the plate. "That's a longer answer than we have time for today." "Fair enough," August said, not pushing. "But since you asked," Holt continued, setting the fork down, "I run a company most people around here have heard of, whether they know it's mine or not. I built it standing on loading docks at 5 in the morning, not sitting behind a desk. Then I stopped being able to stand at all, and it turns out a lot of people only wanted the version of me that could." "That's not fair," August said quietly. "None of that is fair." "No," Holt agreed. "It isn't, but I've had 3 years to get used to unfair. I'm not sure you ever really do, though. You just get quieter about it." August didn't have a ready response for that. He didn't try to fill the silence with something comforting and empty the way people so often do. He just nodded slowly, like he understood exactly what that kind of quiet erasure felt like, because in his own way, since Marianne died, he did too. "You didn't have to come today," Holt said. "Nobody would have known the difference if you hadn't." "Nell would have known," August said simply. "And so would I." Holt didn't say anything to that. He didn't trust his voice enough to try. That sentence stayed with him long after August and Nell had gone home that evening, long after the house had gone quiet again. On the drive home, Nell fell asleep against the window before they'd even reached the highway, worn out from cake and conversation. August glanced at her in the rearview mirror and thought, not for the first time, about how much of raising her alone had come down to small, unplanned decisions just like this one, showing up somewhere he technically didn't have to be, because leaving felt like the wrong kind of easy. He didn't know anything about board meetings or pension funds. He only knew that the man in that big empty house had looked for one afternoon, less alone than he had in a very long time, and that felt like reason enough. That night, for the first time in months, Holt wheeled himself into his study instead of straight to bed. He called Odessa in, and something in his voice made her set down whatever she was carrying. "Pull my calendar," he said. "The last 6 months, every call, every visit, every cancellation. I want to see it laid out in front of me." "Sir, it's late. I can have that ready in the morning." "Tonight, Odessa, please." "Sir, is everything all right?" "No," Holt said, and it was the first time in months he'd admitted it out loud. "I don't think it has been for a while. I just didn't want to look closely enough to know for certain." She'd worked for him long enough to know when a request like that wasn't really about a calendar at all. The pattern took Odessa less than 20 minutes to compile. It took Holt less than 5 to understand what it meant. Reed's calls had dropped off from weekly to monthly to nothing, starting almost exactly 4 months ago. The same week, Vantry's board quietly approved a routine-sounding agenda item called Executive Continuity Planning. Palmer Doss's emails, once copied to Holt on nearly everything that crossed his desk, had thinned out around that same time, replaced by short summaries instead of full reports. Board meeting minutes Holt used to receive within a day now arrived, if at all, a full week later, trimmed down, sanitized, with whole sections quietly marked administrative and left out entirely. It wasn't grief drifting slowly into distance. It was a slope, and someone had been grading it carefully, on purpose, for months. "Odessa, look at this. 4 months ago, exactly. That's when everything changed." "Sir, that could be coincidence." "It could be," Holt said, "but I don't think it is. I think I've been managed, Odessa, quietly, patiently, for months. And I let it happen, because grief is easier to believe than betrayal." Holt sat with that realization for a long time before he said anything else. "Odessa, tomorrow I need you to reach out to the agency August works for. Tell them I'd like to add a day to his schedule. Tell them it's for therapy transport." "Is it?" Odessa asked, already suspecting it wasn't entirely true. "Not exactly," Holt admitted. "There are boxes sitting at Thackeray Yard I haven't touched in 3 years. Old records from before the accident. I need someone to drive me out there, and I'd rather it be someone who has no idea what he's actually helping me find." If you think Holt already knew, deep down, exactly what he was going to uncover in those boxes, or if part of him was still hoping he'd find nothing at all, let us know in the comments below. 2 days later, August pulled up to Bramwell Ridge, expecting a normal therapy run. Instead, Holt directed him to Thackeray Yard, a dusty storage facility 20 minutes outside town that housed old Vantry paperwork nobody had ever bothered to digitize. "Change of plans today?" Holt said, wheeling toward the passenger side of the car. "I need to pick some things up. Won't take long." August didn't ask questions. It wasn't his place to, and honestly, driving Holt somewhere new was a welcome break from the same clinic waiting room he'd sat in twice a week for the last year. He helped load 4 dust-covered cardboard boxes into the trunk, chatted with Holt easily about Nell's volcano project on the drive back, and waited patiently behind the wheel while Holt made 2 phone calls in the passenger seat that he didn't understand a single word of. August had no idea he was helping uncover a fraud. He wasn't trying to. He was just doing what he always did, showing up, being decent, asking for nothing in return beyond his usual pay. Odessa watched Holt work that first night with a mixture of worry and something close to relief. She'd seen him distracted before, and she'd seen him defeated. This was neither. This was the version of him she remembered from years earlier, the one who used to stay up until 2 in the morning cross-referencing shipping, manifest just because a number looked slightly off. She brought him coffee without being asked, and refilled it twice more before midnight. "You're enjoying this?" she said, at one point, not quite a question. I'm remembering what it felt like to matter to something, Holt said, not looking up from the page in front of him. Turns out I missed it more than I let myself admit. Back at Bramwell Ridge that evening, Holt went through the boxes with Odessa's help, spreading old paperwork across the entire surface of his study desk. Old shareholder agreements, founding board bylaws yellowed at the edges, and buried near the bottom of the third box, a set of pension fund disclosures from 4 years earlier, disclosures that, when Holt compared them line by line against the updated versions Palmer Doss had circulated only 8 months ago, simply didn't match. Odessa, come look at this. What is it, sir? Tell me if I'm reading this correctly, because if I am, someone rewrote 200 people's retirements and hoped I'd never notice. The numbers had been quietly restructured. Retirement obligations for over 200 Vantry warehouse and dock employees, the very people Holt used to know by first name, whose kids' birthdays he used to remember better than his own board members did, had been reclassified in a way that freed up capital for something called a strategic transition fund, a fund that, as far as Holt could tell from the paperwork in front of him, existed almost entirely on paper, feeding quietly into a buyout offer from a rival logistics company. A buyout that required, according to one internal memo he found, folded inside a legal envelope, resolution of the founder's operational status. Resolution of the founder's operational status. Holt read that phrase 4 times before he set the memo down. They weren't waiting for me to get better, Odessa. They were waiting for me to be declared unfit. Unfit to object, unfit to sign, unfit to matter. Sir, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything yet, just help me find out how deep it goes. The final piece came 2 days after that, almost by accident. Holt, testing a theory he almost didn't want to be right about, dialed into a scheduled, Vantry, board call 10, minutes early. Using an old access code, nobody on the current board had bothered to revoke. He didn't announce himself. He simply listened. He hasn't asked for the full minutes in months, Palmer Doss was saying, his voice relaxed, almost bored. As long as we keep sending summaries, he won't notice the pension language shifted. Reed's voice came through next, and Holt's chest tightened before his own son had even finished the sentence. He's not going to fight this from a wheelchair in that house. Once the transition fund clears audit, we present it to him as a retirement package. He signs, he steps back, everyone moves on. It's cleaner this way, for him too, honestly. You're sure he won't push back? Palmer asked. He's got no fight left in him, Palmer. Trust me. I know my own father. Holt stayed on that call for 11 more seconds before he muted himself and set the phone face down on the desk, his hand not quite steady. His own son had just called erasing him cleaner. His own son had just told a room full of strangers that his father had no fight left in him. Holt sat alone in his study for a long time after that call ended, staring at nothing in particular, feeling something shift and harden inside his chest that hadn't moved in 3 years. We'll see about that, he said quietly, to no one at all. For the first time in 3 years, Holt Bramwell called an emergency session of the Vantry board. He didn't call ahead to warn anyone he was coming in person. He didn't send Palmer Doss an agenda. He simply had Odessa arrange transport and asked August to drive him, because at this point, August Ferro was the only person left in Holt's life he was absolutely certain hadn't lied to him once. Mr. Bramwell, this is a lot further than the clinic, August said, half joking, as they pulled up outside the tall glass headquarters building. It is, Holt said. Today's a different kind of appointment. The boardroom went quiet the moment Holt wheeled through the double doors himself, a folder of copied documents resting in his lap. Sir, we weren't expecting... Palmer Doss started, half rising from his chair. I know you weren't, Holt said, his voice calm and even. That was rather the point. He didn't raise his voice once, he didn't need to. He laid the pension disclosures out on the table, side by side, the original figures against the quietly altered ones, and let the numbers speak for themselves. He read aloud the phrase, resolution of the founder's operational status, slowly, deliberately, and watched 3 separate board members suddenly find something urgent to review on their laptops rather than meet his eyes. Reed sat frozen at the far end of the table, his tailored suit doing nothing to hide how pale he'd gone. I heard the call, Holt said, looking only at his son now. 10 minutes before it started. Cleaner this way. For him too. Is that what you tell yourself at night, Reed? That erasing your own father is a kindness? Dad, it wasn't like that. Then tell me what it was like, Reed, because from where I'm sitting, it sounds exactly like that. Reed opened his mouth, then closed it again. There wasn't an answer that would have helped him in that moment, and some part of him seemed to know it. One of the older board members, a quiet woman named Vasquez, who had sat on the Vantry board since its founding, finally spoke into the silence. Holt, if this is accurate, we need outside auditors in this building by tomorrow morning. It's accurate, Holt said. I'd stake the company on it, which, as it happens, is exactly what several people in this room were counting on me not doing. Palmer Doss tried once more, his voice thinner now. Holt, everything we did was in the company's long-term interest. Don't, Holt said, and for the first time that morning, something sharp entered his voice. Don't tell me what was in the company's interest while you were quietly stripping retirement funds from 200 people who trusted this name. Tell me what was in your interest, Palmer. That, at least, would be honest. Palmer said nothing, neither did Reed. By the end of that meeting, the board voted to suspend Palmer Doss pending a full independent audit and to strip Reed of any decision-making authority over pension or retirement matters, effective immediately. The buyout collapsed entirely within the week, once outside auditors were brought in to review every altered document. 211 Vantry employees kept the retirement benefits that had quietly been rewritten out from under them, none of them ever knowing how close it had come to disappearing. Holt didn't ask for Reed to be removed from the board entirely. He didn't ask for anyone's public humiliation, even though he could have had it easily. What he asked for instead was simpler and in some ways much harder to deliver. A full, transparent accounting sent directly to every employee whose future had been quietly gambled with, in writing with his own name signed at the bottom. I built this company on being able to look a driver or a warehouse foreman in the eye and mean whatever I told him, Holt said to the room before he left, his hand steady on the wheels of his chair. I'm 58 years old, and I am not going to stop doing that now just because some of you decided a man in a wheelchair couldn't still hold you accountable. In the weeks that followed the board meeting, Holt didn't hear from Reed at all, no calls, no texts, not even the kind of brief transactional messages that used to pass for a relationship between them. Odessa asked once, gently, whether that bothered him. It used to, Holt admitted. I think I spent 3 years telling myself the silence meant something other than what it actually meant. I don't have to do that anymore. Do you think he'll ever call, sir? I don't know, Holt said. And for the first time, I think I'm all right either way. I spent 3 years waiting on a phone that wasn't going to ring. I'm done waiting. What surprised him more was how little the silence stung now compared to before. There was too much else filling the space it used to occupy. Audits to review, employees to meet with personally for the first time in years, a young dispatcher's daughter to ask about whenever her father came by. A month later, Holt Bramwell sat in his study at Bramwell Ridge, a room that no longer felt like the empty space it had been on his birthday. Odessa had the windows open to let the afternoon air in. There was noise in the house again, contractors finishing a wheelchair ramp addition along the east wing, a newly formed pension oversight committee meeting twice a month around his own dining table, phones ringing that were actually meant for him. August Ferro sat across from him that afternoon, looking a little uncertain about why he'd been called in outside his usual driving hours. I want to offer you something, Holt said, folding his hands in his lap, and I want you to know up front, it isn't charity, and it isn't payment for anything you've already done. You didn't do any of this for a reward. That's exactly why I trust you with it now. He explained it plainly, without dressing it up. A newly created employee trust position at Vantry, overseeing fair treatment and benefits for warehouse and transport staff. The people, Holt said, who built the company the same way he once had, from the ground up, not from behind a desk. A real salary, real security, the kind August had never once had the luxury of counting on. No strings attached, and no expectation of loyalty beyond simply doing the job honestly. Why me? August asked, genuinely uncertain. I don't know the first thing about pensions or corporate committees. You knew the first thing about showing up, Holt said. Everything else, I can teach a person. That part I can't. August sat with that for a moment, his throat tight in a way he hadn't expected. Mr. Bramwell, I didn't drive you to that storage yard or bring Nell here that day because I wanted anything out of it. I know, Holt said quietly. That's exactly why I'm offering it now, instead of then. August didn't answer right away. He thought about Nell, about the small apartment above the hardware store, about 2 years of quietly scraping by without once asking anyone for a favor he hadn't earned through his own hands. Nell's going to want to know if this means we can finally get a dog, he said at last, his voice a little unsteady. Holt laughed, a real, full laugh, the kind that had been rare in that house for 3 long years. Tell her yes, he said. Tell her I said so myself. That evening, when August got home and told Nell the news, she didn't ask about the salary or the title at all. She went straight to her small desk in the corner of the living room, pulled out a fresh piece of construction paper and started drawing. Another card? August asked, leaning in the doorway. It's not even his birthday. I know, Nell said, not looking up from her crayons. This one's not because he's sad. This one's just because. She drew a wheelchair again, the way she always did, but this time there was a small dog sitting beside it, and behind them both, a little house with warm yellow light glowing in every single window. If there's one thing this story leaves behind, it's this: the people who show up when there's absolutely nothing in it for them are the ones worth building a future around, not the ones who show up for a signature, not the ones who show up for a share of an estate, the ones who show up for a birthday card, on their day off, because a 7-year-old insisted it mattered, and never once asked for anything in return. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments which moment hit hardest, the empty birthday table, or the reckoning in that boardroom. And if you believe in stories where quiet decency wins out in the end, subscribe, because there's another one coming next week.